My name is Emmy DeGrappa, and I am with the Wyoming Humanities Council. And we are ThinkWy. And what that stands for is that we are in the business of convening conversations and critical thinking. And whether you know it or not, you do the humanities every day. Anytime you're thinking, discussing, listening, learning, you are doing the humanities. And the humanities is a huge word, and it encompasses sociology and psychology and history and language and culture. And so that's why it's just easier for me to say you do it every day, because you do one of those things all the time. And so tonight, for this ThinkWy gathering, this is on art and social activism. And we have three presenters, Raul Gutierrez, Ann Muller, and Mary Erickson. And they're all very special people, and they're going to talk to you about how they use their art, their work, and their life skills to talk about social change, social issues, and social activism. So the first person I want to introduce is Raul Gutierrez. He is the Managing Director of Production and Management, Miami. He is the owner and cinematographer of Peak Films. And Raul has 30 years of experience in film and television production and has worked for numerous television production and post-production networks and agencies, including Networks, Manhattan Transfer, and Univision Television. And in 2011, Raul launched Production and Management Miami, a full-service production company, and he lives probably part-time, and he might correct me, but maybe even more than part-time between here and Miami. So welcome, Raul. Okay.
A little more than part-time, unfortunately. Thank you, Emmy, and thank you to the Wyoming Humanities Council for inviting me to speak here tonight. Thank you all for coming, and I am humbled and honored to be alongside these two wonderful ladies tonight that do so much for this community. It really is an honor. So a little bit about myself. I'm a visual communicator. And for those who may not know what a visual communicator is or what we do, I basically interpret and communicate complex or unfamiliar concepts or ideas to others. As a production or project manager for Production and Management Miami, I travel to faraway places where I transform set designs on paper into completed visual sets for film and television. As a documentary filmmaker, I try to capture rare or undiscovered human moments and transform them into visual stories. I say try because as an ethical documentarian, all I can do is try to predict the right place and time that will allow me to point my camera and capture a part of my story. Except for interview setups, ethical documentaries are not scripted or staged. This is real human emotion, raw and uncensored. So, who is this bald man? I was born in Havana, Cuba, and immigrated to South Florida, where I grew up, studied, and started a family. My wife, Kathleen, is a dual immersion teacher at Davy Jackson Elementary. Kathy is not only my soulmate, but also my source of inspiration. We have two children, Austin, a senior at Jackson High, and Taylor, who is a freshman at Journeys. One of the many things my wife and I share is the belief that we can make a difference in people's lives. We truly believe that. And she works her magic with little people, I work with big people. She has a more interesting job. I studied television and film and later continued my studies in communications and new media. I worked for a variety of employers, like Emmy said, and clients ranging from Univision Television Group to MTV networks. So why Jackson Hole? Why am I in your community doing a documentary and so dedicated to it? I first visited Jackson Hole in 1992 and was immediately captivated by the beauty of this valley and the warmth of this community. It's intoxicating. We vacation in Jackson for almost every year. And we were so drawn to this valley that in 1992, in 1997, my wife and I were married on the Snake River Overlook. My son was born in December of that same year, so if you do the math, while born in Miami, he is a Jackson baby. Magic place. I have traveled far for work and recreation, but from Washington to Maine, from Milan to Rio, no place has ever come close to the stunning natural beauty and genuine human connection that exists in this magnificent place. It took us 20 years to get here, but through hard work and perseverance, my family is fortunate to now call Jackson home. Call me naive, but I thought Jackson was close to perfect. Issues that plague other communities such as low tourism, unemployment, low tax revenue, underfunded education could not exist here. I knew that housing was not cheap, and I kept abreast of real estate prices throughout the years. But coming from Naples, Florida, I really didn't believe that real estate prices were over the top. I imagined that the rising hotel construction and commercial development, coupled with growing tourism revenue, had allowed the town to keep up with employer affordable housing for its growing workforce. Having worked on South Beach for 13 years, I have seen homelessness firsthand and can easily recognize its face. There was no way that homelessness could be an issue in our wealthy, diverse, idyllic community. When we moved to Jackson in 2013, we met a young gentleman named Erickson, who managed the Dali jewelry store on the town square. Erickson, who is here tonight, is a stylish, obviously he didn't know I was going to say that, but here he is. He is a stylish, creative person with a passion for his community, human interaction, and photography. So we hit it off right away. My family enjoyed his company and we all became good friends. In 2014, while working the World Cup project in Rio, I received a call from my family who were distraught after reading a story in the Jackson Hole Daily. After recognizing him from a picture in the paper, they learned that our good friend Erickson was homeless. Erickson had lost the lease on his apartment and had been sleeping in his car for several months. It was difficult for me to understand how a hard-working, well-liked, well-adjusted, and intelligent individual with a full-time job could be homeless. I had a hard time getting that news out of my head that night. I didn't know that I was about to discover a new form of homelessness and Jackson's weakest link. During the 6 weeks in Brazil, I faced aggressive timelines, story of my life, labor strikes, security concerns, power outages, and language barriers. But what weighed the heaviest on me was Ericsson's story. As soon as I returned home, I reached out to him, and we got together. And he told me his story and opened my eyes to this important issue and how many in this valley were being affected by it. During my time in Brazil, I contemplated the idea of doing a documentary on this story. As I began to research and discover the extent and consequences of this growing crisis, I made the decision to do my part to try to bring awareness to this critical issue. I committed to using my craft and shooting a film. And for the last year and a half, I've been shooting my self-funded documentary entitled Postcards from Paradise. I'd like to introduce the first 6 minutes of my film. See if I can find the right one.
No.
Close.
Nope.
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 Those are the same ones right now. Here we go.
married in this trailer for 14 years.
Yes.
I never moved for 14.
Sorry about that. We had this all planned out. We changed computers last minute.
Used to do AV in college for professors. Every day. She doesn't know what to do.
How are you, Stella? This is what happens at work.
This happens as
Yeah.
Fell into place when I got to Jackson. Coming out here, just being with myself and the Tetons and Yellowstone and Jackson, and it's really helped me out. I get to understand myself and who I am, in a sense. Tetons themselves are just so massive. When you're right in front of them, you just can't believe this humongous, massive mountain range just came right out of the ground. And when you're looking at them from the front and you see the flatness where you're standing, and how from out of nowhere, they just shoot up right into the sky. I think that's just gorgeous, beautiful. Jackson is, if you've never lived in a seasonal town, you don't understand the diversity and the variation that it gives. There's people that live here in the summer and go away for the winter. There's people that come only for the winter and they go away for the summer. There's people, I have a friend who works at the ski lift because he loves to snowboard and ski. So in the winter, all he does is work at the ski lift because there's where he wants to be anyway. And then in the summer, he works at a sub shop over here making sandwiches. And that's kind of what you do when you want to live here in Jackson year-round. You adapt to the environment. I was lucky enough to find a job that's open year-round. Maybe in November, we close down. April is also off-season, so that's when everything changes and you can find jobs. You look in the paper, 4 pages of help wanted ads everywhere, all the time. This whole year, the paper has always been wanting help. So the problem here isn't finding a job, it's finding a place to live.
I think a lot of the housing issues stem from the fact that we used to have more of an off-season and people would leave after the summer or after the winter, and then apartments would open up and homes would open up. But people have started to stay longer, they're not as seasonal, and that has created a big problem for Teton County. The people we see at Community Resource Center are people that have been involved in our community for a number of years, and the homeless situation is pretty much out of control.
First time I ever stayed in my car. The first night, I tried to keep a low profile. I was nervous and trying not to draw attention. It was a little cluttered. I didn't know how long I could do it, but I felt like I was in this little cocoon, and it wasn't as uncomfortable as I thought it was going to be. I guess it was exciting because I was nervous too. I didn't know if the police were going to come and look in there or knock on my window. It's kind of dark, so you can't see me, but I mean, if I have my computer on or the car light on, you can see that I'm in there. So I was a little worried, so I kind of stayed low in the car, but I ended up getting used to it and not worrying so much about it, especially after I started finding out I wasn't the only one doing it. And then not too long ago, I saw in the paper that it was finally okay to live in your car. I did get sad, and I did cry a few times, just wondering how long I was going to be like that. It does hurt a little, especially if you talk to someone who doesn't really understand what's going on in Jackson. To anybody else where I'm from, this is kind of hitting rock bottom. It got easier with time.
Little backstory to that. When I visited his song and I was trying to do this documentary in an ethical manner, so I told him when I'm ready to shoot your night scene, your sleeping scene, I'm gonna be a fly on the wall, I'm gonna follow you around. And I decided to take my family to raise awareness and so they could know what it was like to be in this situation. I took them, I showed up at Dali's and was kind of one step ahead of him, setting up the camera, going ahead and setting up the camera, and him walking by and him going about his nightly business. And my son helped me with the tripod. Kathy and my daughter helped me out with some of the taking the stuff out of the way so I could capture all of this without interrupting, without staging it, without any script or direction. When we left that night, there was not one comment in the car on the way home. It was such an impact for us to stare homelessness in the face. So he slept in my house at night. Awareness is the realization that something exists. Technology's not helping out tonight. It is the ability to feel emotion and gain knowledge of a situation. This film introduces 4 wonderful individuals who are a valuable part of our unique community. Through my lens, we witness their day-to-day lives, their families, fears, dreams, and triumphs. Film has the capacity to capture human behavior and combine visual elements with other sensory stimulus, such as sound and music. Like all art, when effectively combined, these sensory elements can become a powerful catalyst for change. I recently read an article on documentary filmmaking that suggested, in working with film, we don't write policy recommendations. We create cultural moments, and that opens the space for change to happen, for more stories to be told and heard, and for people who have the will to seize the moment. The purpose of my film is to provide a glimpse into that which escapes many of us, a look into the face of homelessness, a look into the hopelessness and despair that this issue can cause in people's lives. My hope is that my art will play a small part in finding a big solution to our most important problem. I plan to complete this film by spring and continue to promote awareness so that everyone will have the chance to seize their moment and do their part. Thank you.
Guess I'm the only one that wants to use a microphone. Thanks, Raul. Next up, our next presenter is Ann Muller. Ann is an artist and a photographer. Ann's artistry includes being a painter, director, dancer, choreographer, ballet teacher, and sculptor, and in one way or another, they have all had to do with the telling of people's stories. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you. So I clearly have a fickle muse. Hard time focusing. Before I start my talk, I have a little exercise for you. And what you've just seen may help you in this exercise. I'd like you to think about a photograph or a painting or a scene in a movie, even a play. You can close your eyes to do this if you like, but just think about a picture that has affected you and how it makes you feel. Or think about a piece of music, and it might make you, turn you into a rock star in your car, or it might make you cry or remember something. So, generally, if I asked you how did that feel, that would be a little hard for you to say. It's hard to put these feelings in words. And that's because art is the language of emotion. So the Awareness Project JH is using the language of art, all kinds of art, so that we may feel what life is like for some of us here in our valley. Through arts, dialogue, and storytelling, we begin to understand the challenges that are facing our workforce, and also those facing our growing population of at-risk individuals and families here in our community, and how we respond to what we feel and what we learn, what we know. How we respond to this growing need is a measure of our community character. So what kind of community do we want to be? I have a hard time putting this in words. There's here in Jackson a hidden negative energy. There's what's hidden is underneath. While we enjoy the positives that are so obvious. And I think we all know what I'm talking about. We don't really see it, we don't hear it, and most especially we don't feel it unless we're living in it. And we might read a local story about something going on here and grasp some statistics or read some opinions, but until someone like Raul shows us what it's like to work a 40-hour week and still not be able to afford housing, we don't know about it. And we might hear of a story, for example, and it would affect us, but we don't know what it's like to be an elder, disabled, living in subsidized housing, and living in fear of losing that housing. We don't know what it feels like, I don't think many of us do, what it feels like to be evicted from our home of 14 years. So I believe art has the power to connect us directly to the experience of another. And knowing about what's beneath the surface in our beautiful valley, I feel is to know who we are. And when we begin to see what's hidden, we might ask ourselves, what kind of community are we because of what I'm not doing? So a year ago, I was not an artistic activist. I don't think I've ever been called an activist before, so thank you. I had heard that there was poverty here, and I'd certainly seen the trailers on Gregory Lane, but for me it was all somehow out there. And then my friends Nancy Hoffman, who's the head of the board for Community Resource Center, and Mary Erickson, the executive director of the Community Resource Center, they enlightened me. The stories and situations that they revealed to me opened my eyes and my heart. Poverty in Jackson was no longer out there, it was something here in my heart. And while I had never considered there was something I could do, then I knew that there was something. And I can use my art to enlighten others in the same way that I have been enlightened. So Nancy, Mary, and I started the awareness program project, JH, because it's very much about us here in Jackson, earlier this year. So what I bring to the project is storytelling photography. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama in a time just right before Martin Luther King and the Selma marches and the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. It's a little hard to talk about it. The lives of good people who were a daily part of my own life were basically hidden. They came over the mountain, worked in the yard, cleaned houses, did laundry, delivered prescriptions from the drugstore, and some of them soothed me and corrected me. And then at the end of the day, they got back on the bus and they went back over the mountain. And I never knew anything about them. I didn't know what their community looked like. I didn't know what their houses looked like. I didn't even know if they had families. I didn't know what they cared about, were proud about, were worried about. And I never knew anything about any of the other people who got on the bus with them. So you might well imagine that there was a hidden, unnamed tension in Birmingham at that time. And whether we acknowledge it or not, we have a hidden, unnamed tension here in Jackson. My art's about telling about what's highly energized and hidden. And it's surely in some way about the social injustice in Birmingham, Alabama in the 1950s and 60s. So the Awareness Project, JH, is a movement of awareness that can lend our community a voice. Our slogan is be aware. Talk about it. Talk everywhere. Talk to your friends. Talk at dinner parties. Talk at church. And seek solutions together, because we want awareness to lead to solutions. So to do this, because we are actually talking, we're using the language of art, and that's the language of emotion. So we want painters and singers and actors and dancers and photographers, videographers, poets, writers, and amateur or professional. It doesn't matter, because once we've looked under the table, so to speak, everybody will see something to tell about. So we want you to join us in raising awareness. You know, we know each other by our stories, right? And we want you to help us find these stories and help us tell these stories. And we also want you to join our Connect gatherings. This is a group of very diverse people. We meet every 3 weeks. And we focus just on how can we be the community we want to be, and how can we raise awareness. And we're very, very open to input from as many people as we can. You'll get a card when you leave, and it has our site on here, and you can find out there under the projects button how to join us, and we would love it. And if you have not found your lifetime art, because maybe somebody's sitting out there saying, I don't do anything. We really need your help. We need people to help us research these stories. We need people to help us with events and exhibits. We have a number coming up, and we just need your support in any way you can find, and are free to support us. Do we have extreme poverty here? Yes, we do. Do we have children who qualify for food subsidies? I was just told that 32% of our Teton schools, Teton County schools, 35% of these children can't afford the meals. So yes, we do have this. Do we have a wave of gentrification over us? Yes, we do. And none of these problems are insurmountable. Not even housing. These are problems that are plaguing our country. And they're in small towns like ours, but they're also in big cities. And we believe that Jackson can be a model for the country. We have the brains, we have the money, and we do have the compassion. And we're small. We're small enough to do this. So let's do it. I get a little carried away. I'm going to read you a couple of three little short stories that Marcia Kunstl wrote. And it just gives you an idea of some of the things that we are researching, looking at, and trying to amplify. So these are the stories of Cedar Creek. Janet was dismayed. I don't trust anybody anymore, said the 77-year-old. She had just limped slowly across the street and across the parking lot from Pioneer Homestead back to her apartment, leaning on the wheeled walker that keeps her mobile. Janet had been up since 5 that morning, filling out an application for an apartment at Pioneer, the housing complex for elderly, low-income people. She had lived for the past 3 years in Cedar Creek apartment complex, where 18 disabled people receive rent subsidies under a federal program, but the money ran out. Rents were being hiked, in some cases doubled or tripled, and that all within a month. Her rent of $679 per month was going to spike to $1,190. And of course, non-payment would mean eviction. Coming to the rescue, at least temporarily, were the Community Resource Center and the Community Foundation of Jackson Hole. They found funding to subsidize the federal money. They will supply subsidies until January, when a new federal contract should take effect. Janet is having none of it. She doesn't want the stress of always wondering what will happen next. What will happen in January when the temperatures are way below freezing and the snow is knee deep? Will she be evicted then? So that's why she's applied for an apartment across the way at Pioneer. I thought I'd be here for the rest of my life. I thought I'd pass here. If Janet moves to Pioneer, she'll trade her 2-bedroom apartment for a much smaller 1-bedroom. The rent will be about what she pays now, she said, which she can afford because of her Social Security payment and a federal pension from work as an auditor for the Army and the Navy. Most of her income goes for rent and for the $4 lunches at the senior center, which is her main meal for that day, for a day. I don't have any extra money for shows and anything like that the senior center takes people to. But the rent is worth it to me because I love this apartment, she said. And if she moves, she won't have any more spendable income. And she won't have the apartment that she loves. And she won't have many of the things that keep her company. It wouldn't fit in the smaller space. I was supposed to be in the flower of my years, she said. They weren't supposed to do this to me. Ted, who lives across the hall from Janet, was going to fight the rent hike. He sent letters to Congress and planned to appeal to the Jackson Town Council. His rent was going up from $255 a month to $950. So, thank you. Ted. I never told you I was technical. I do something like this to disabled people, he said. Ted, 58, said he has Asperger's, which limits the possibilities for work. Currently not employed, Ted has held jobs in nurseries and as a security guard, and is expecting to start work at Vertical Harvest when it opens next year. It isn't likely to produce a paycheck covering the rent of nearly $1,000 a month, should the federal subsidy fall through. Wayne, 67, lives down the hall and pays $301 in rent. The cost was going to jump to $649. He had planned to ignore the increase and hope for the best. And if he were evicted, I probably would have gone to the mission, he said. Wayne, who said he is bipolar, works part-time in a laundry, receives disability payments and food stamps. He said he can't afford lunch at the senior center. Getting this temporary help with rent was a weight off my shoulders. He's counting on the federal subsidy for resuming. It'll be a hard time if it don't go through, he said. Be aware, talk about it, and seek solutions.
Thanks, Ann. So our last presenter is Mary Erickson. And what's really unique about Mary is that she is the former assistant priest of St. John's Episcopal Church. And she holds a master's degree of divinity from Harvard Divinity School. I think that's really special. So thanks, Mary. Welcome. After Mary's presentation, we are going to have Q&A.
Good evening. So I took the job, I left the church and became the executive director at Community Resource Center about a year ago when Smokey moved on to bigger and brighter places as one of our commissioners, and I thank her for all the work that she did so that I could step into this role. I often joke that I left the church so that I could go to CRC and do the real work of the church. One of the biggest challenges I said as I was going into CRC was that we as a community, we have a sense of ourselves as very unique and special, and we are. This is an extraordinary place. But because of that, we often don't want to see the ugly part. A lot of people who come here are coming here for recreation, part-time. They really don't want to look at sort of the hard stuff. And that was our biggest challenge, was to really open people's eyes and get people to really pay attention. And so when Anne and Nancy and I all sat down and talked about this, it became very clear that this was an important project, not just for the work that we do, but for our entire community. I'm not an artist. I did make a living before I became a priest as a writer, but I did technical writing, which I would not call artistic. But as Anne said, one of the things I love about this is you can contribute in so many different ways. And I so admire the ways that Anne and Raul are able to tell the stories and showing really how art can be used, not just to tell the story, but also to open our eyes and our hearts and our minds. And that really is the objective behind the work that Raul is doing with his documentaries and that Anne is doing with the Awareness Project. Art has the power to change us in unexpected ways. But awareness is just a first step. One of the questions that Anne and Nancy kept asking is, what next? What is the call to action? What are we asking people to do? Because awareness is a beginning. It's not the end. The opening of our eyes and our hearts and our minds prepares us, but hopefully awareness moves us to try to understand. Not just understand that particular story, but to try to understand the circumstances that created that story, for better or for worse. Each story Anne and Raul tell stands on its own, but none exists in a vacuum. What are the social, economic, cultural, political forces at work that create the environment in which the story unfolds? A common thread to these stories that we've heard today is something we hear over and over again in Jackson. We have a housing crisis. Have you heard? There are many factors colliding in this valley, creating a perfect storm. The fact that only 3% of our land is able to be developed. We are geographically limited by these beautiful mountains all around us. We have a burgeoning high-end tourist mecca. We are building our service economy on the backs of very low-wage workers. And we have a volatile, extremely limited, and very expensive rental market. Cedar Creek is probably more critical here in Jackson than its counterpart in New York City because there are so few other options, right? In today's rental market, owners increase rents as much as 50%, and this has been going on for the last few years. This isn't new. It came to a rolling boil a few months ago when Blair Place announced a 45% increase. And what happens in a community like this, when there are only a couple of Blair Places, it has a bigger impact on the marketplace. And so it set a new standard for the market. Entry-level, modest two-bedroom apartment last year went for about $1,200. The standard is now $18 or $19 or $2,000. At $1,200 a month, families were making it. Generally, getting by, just barely. I don't really know how, but they were. And I honestly don't know how they're going to make it at $1,800, and they probably, in the long run, won't. The other problem that we're seeing a lot of, and Anne alluded to this, is people being, if you're not priced out of the market, you're losing your home to development or gentrification. And to their credit, a lot of developers are building housing. Some even modest housing in that $1,800 a month range, which does help our housing problem. It actually does help. But the problem is that they're displacing people who are spending between $900, $1,000, and they're not replacing that with like product. So when these families go, where do they go and what do they do? The most flagrant example of this was the Marriott. Think back to December of last year, when 40 individuals, I think it was 10 families, were displaced from the trailer park on Muller to make way for the new Marriott. Estimates are that the Marriott will hire between 80 and 100 people. Displaced 40, 80 to 100 new jobs. They were required to, I believe, provide 8 workforce units. The math doesn't add up, and we're losing ground. For each of these events, there are real lives that have been impacted, real families, and that's the power of storytelling, of the art. That is what the Awareness Project is all about. I want to take a minute, if I can do this without messing up the computer, take a minute to show you a clip from one of the families one of the families, I may need you, Raul.
Siri. Play.
Anyway, one of the families that was displaced from a trailer park last year, about a year ago. I should have my daughter do this. She has a Mac. And then go back. Thank you.
I lived in this trailer for 14 years. I never moved for 14 years in this place, so now when I got it to move, this is really hard for me because I don't know have any idea what can I do for try to look in another place. Made so many phone calls and knocked many doors, and this is really hard and very painful. I think the problem in Jackson is they need to have more place for renting and maybe more cheaper, because the people when they come into here is we thinking about make money for our family, for try to give a good life, but with that the expensive rent is almost impossible. Before we was to pay $800 for the rent, and now we need pay almost the double, $1,800 or $2,000. I don't want to leave my daughters all day in the daycare just for working and try to make money just for pay a rent. The renting is coming higher and higher and higher. It's impossible. Make a lot of money just for paying rent. I can do it, no, this almost impossible.
Bottom line.
Bottom left?
Yeah, right. The
Bottom right?
long right.
Next to normal view.
Military right. Two other left.
This is my right, just for the record.
Of course, I'm going backwards, sorry.
Don knows Harvey.
Okay.
Wow.
It seems so simple when you were showing it to me earlier. Before I continue, I am so grateful to people like Gerson and Raul and Blanca and Ted and Wayne and Janet for allowing us to tell their stories. It's very personal. And they do it because they realize how important it is that we understand, but it touches me that they're willing to be that open and that vulnerable to our community. So I thank them all for that. Quick update on the Gonzalez family. So when they left the trailer park, they ended up moving over the mountain. This is something I hear a lot. Well, people can move over to Victor, or they can go down to Alpine. And it's not that simple. First of all, the image that comes to my mind is actually the story that Anne told. And then what kind of a community do we live in if all of our service workers live outside of our community? What does that say about us, and who are we? So that's the first thing, image, that comes to mind. But it's also not that simple for the life of the people who do that. And I know a lot of people do work, but think about people who are making $10 to $15 an hour and working 2 jobs and have 1 car and have little preschool children, what that life is like. So for the Gonzalez family, they would get up in the morning and they'd bundle the girls up and they'd put them in the back seat and they would take off at about 6 in the morning. And Saul would go to his first job. And Blanca, who cleans houses for a living, would go from house to house and do her work. And sometimes she'd take the girls with her, and sometimes, if she was lucky, she could leave them with friends. In the afternoon, Saul would go to his second job. I'm not sure what the girls did when Blanca wasn't cleaning. I'm not sure where they went. Probably hung out with people in the community. I'm not sure. But Saul would work the second job, and he'd get off sometimes as late as 10 o'clock at night, and they'd bundle the girls back up and put them in the back seat and drive back over the mountain, getting home at about 11 o'clock at night with their 2 preschool daughters. And they'd go to bed, and they'd get up the next morning and do it all over again. It isn't any kind of a life. It's not any kind of a life for Blanca and Saul, but even more so for those precious little girls, and they deserve more than that. Eventually, the Gonzalez family found a place to rent over here. It costs more, so they work more. But even with their crazy schedules, they're able to create a healthier family life for their girls. But I'm not sure it's sustainable long term. What happens when the rents go up again? Knowing their story, getting to know them, helps us to see beyond statistics, forces us to move past pat answers, and doesn't allow us to shrug the problem off. These problems hurt real people. And these are good, hardworking, generous people, grateful for all that they have, wanting to create a good life for their girls and contribute to our community. In fact, Blanca and Saul donated to CRC through old bills this year. It touches me. Anne and the Awareness Project has helped us to put a face on this story. And when we know them, we cannot turn our backs on them. So here's the problem. Individuals and families in Jackson, hard-working people in Jackson, are struggling. Our tourist economy has come to rely on their cheap labor, so there are plenty of jobs, but they're struggling. And the outcomes from that struggle not only hurt those families and those individuals, they hurt all of us. You may have read in the newspaper this morning about the rise in teen suicide attempts and suicidal ideation in Jackson. We see that at CRC. Families are struggling. Kids are internalizing that stress, and parents are scared to death. It's a vicious cycle, and ultimately we will all pay the price. And is this the kind of community we really want to be? So what can we do? Solutions begin with awareness. Now you see it, you can't turn away. We then work to understand the issues, understand the impact of the decisions that we make as a community, the impact of continued commercial development, of the arguments for and against public funding for affordable rental housing, consequences of the decisions that we as a community make every day. And then we do something, right? We speak up. We speak to one another. We speak to our county commissioners and our town council. We go to meetings. We write letters to the editors. We write letters to our electeds, both here and in Washington, because it actually matters. So I take a step back. I want to tell you a story about advocacy at work. And this relates back to our friends at Cedar Creek. Recently, field reps from our 3 Washington delegates came to town and held office hours at Town Hall. And I went down there to meet with them to talk about the USDA Rural Development Rental Assistance Program. It's a federal program that funds places like Cedar Creek. So just to give you a quick snapshot, Congress did pass a continuing resolution that will fund the subsidies. There's still a lot of questions Will they pay back the owners who lost all those subsidies for 4 to 5, sometimes as many as 6 months in 2015? We don't know. The major problem, though, is that there's a shortfall in those subsidies every single year. This was not unique. The unique thing was that it was such a long period of time. The subsidies don't make it to the end of the year, ever. Every year, the owners eat that loss. And then the next year comes along and they get the money, and it's sort of stealing from Peter to pay Paul. I should know that, I'm a priest. So they're always about a month behind. So the issue is we need to have a more stable environment for these very low-cost houses. It's not a great environment. There's not a lot of incentive if you're an owner. Certainly not a lot of incentive if you have any intentions of ever building a low-cost place. And it also creates a very unstable home life for people like Janet and Ted and Wayne. The interesting part about this, so when I sat down with these 3 women who talk to a lot of people and hear a lot of stories, they knew all about this. They knew all about the national problem. They knew exactly what was going on in Wyoming, and they knew exactly what was going on in Jackson, Wyoming. They knew about Cedar Creek. They knew about the funds that we were able to raise through CRC and the Community Foundation to offset the subsidies, to pay for the subsidies. And you know why they knew? Because they had heard from many, many, many concerned citizens through emails and phone calls and letters. They heard, they listened, they were concerned. It makes a difference. And so when you think it doesn't, know that it does. One voice alone can have tremendous power, but imagine the power we can have if we all speak together. So awareness leads to understanding, which in turn leads us to action or advocacy. Once you know, you cannot sit back and do nothing. You have to speak up, get angry. These stories should make you angry. Here we are living in arguably the wealthiest county and the wealthiest country in the universe. Lost my thought there, sorry. So I get for not reading. And yet, a significant number of people are living on the edge all the time. Anne quoted the children on free and affordable lunch at Jackson Elementary. I believe it's 1 in 3. Here in Jackson, 1 in 3 children are on the free and affordable lunch program. It's shocking to me. Something's broken. And we can put our heads in the sand and say there's nothing we can do. It can't be solved. But you know what I say to that? BS. We can. The only reason we can't is if we say we can't. Did I mention that we're living in the wealthiest county, in the wealthiest country in the universe? We have extraordinary resources, financial, certainly, but also social, intellectual, political. There is nothing we can't do if we put our minds to it. I read an article on affordable housing recently and said, affordable housing isn't a feasibility issue, it is a moral issue. It's not that we can't, it's that we won't. Do we have the will? Because that's what we need to move forward. The biggest obstacle we have isn't the scarcity and cost of land, which is what everyone will tell you, but the will, our will. Do we want to fix this problem? Do we want to be a culturally and economically diverse community, a real community made up of a variety of people and perspectives, or do we want to be a resort? We work so hard to preserve that which we believe makes this community so special, our extraordinary environment, and it is, don't get me wrong, it is extraordinary. The public lands and the open spaces. But there's another part of this community that is also unique and powerful and beautiful, and that's our people. They certainly deserve as much of our energy and our care. It's not going to be easy. We'll have to make hard decisions, and not everyone's going to be happy. We may have to be willing to pay a little extra in sales tax or whatever tax it takes in order to secure land to develop affordable rental housing. Landowners and developers and builders and realtors and financiers and all the various people involved, may have to be willing to make a little less money, a little less return on their investment. I'm all for making money, but it may be okay to make a little less in order to invest in the future of our community. Business may have to pay their employees a little more, and we as consumers may have to put pressure on them to do so. You don't have to agree with everything I'm saying tonight. There's a lot of opinions on all of these issues. You don't have to agree with where we're trying to end up, but I think we all agree that there's a problem. At least we're aware of that, right? You can be on the opposite side of every issue from me, but I still want you to get engaged, to get involved, and to be part of the solution. You don't have to support a penny tax or any of the other political things that are going on right now, but what are your ideas? Maybe between us all we can figure out a way forward. I won't accept anything less. I won't accept the argument that there's nothing we can do, because I know that there is. If there wasn't, I wouldn't get up and go to work every morning. If we don't act, we are at risk of losing that which makes us so special as a community, the real heart and soul of our community. We need to act for Blanca and Sal and their girls, for Ted and Wayne and Janet, for Gerson, and for all the individuals and their families and children that we haven't met yet. And that is why this matters so much. So thank you all for being here. So turn it over to you.
And Raul, and if anyone has any questions, you can just direct them at each of the presenters.
Here, I'll stand up. Oh, come on.
Okay.
Yes.
It seems to me that a lot of people have read the articles in the paper and have heard the conversations about the housing crisis here. But I don't think that very many people are actually aware of the human cost. And I don't think they want to know. And I think the reason they don't want to know is because then they would have to do something. And I think that is the real problem facing us, is how do we get the people that are resisting the knowledge to actually open their hearts and minds to learn. I think it's a big problem.
You're addressing.
Oh, I think that's exactly right, and that was what I said when I first came in. Is that's our biggest problem, is people not wanting to know. And our hope is, and I don't know why I'm not artist in the group, but our hope is that through art you can reach them past their minds and past their resistance into their hearts, and that once you know, you're right. Once you know, you can't just turn your back. And that is scary for people, but through the right vehicle, through the art and through painting and poetry and all the different ways that we are inviting people into these stories, that we can get past the resistance and into their hearts. It's a tall order, but
No, I don't.
I tell my kids all the time, there are two ways of learning about something. You stumble, you fall on your face, and you get up and you dust yourself, or you heed the warnings and educate yourself before it hurts. Mm-hmm. And I think we're at the phase where we can see what's happening. We know what's happening. You can read about it, it's tangible, it's available, or we can wait until it gets worse, which it will. And we can wait until our first responders are all gone, and it takes 10 minutes to respond to an emergency call. We can wait until there's a disaster, which could happen in a mountain community, and we don't have help because they live in Alpine and Victor. So this is the time to start thinking, start coming up with solutions before it's serious.
And it's happening now. I mean, I had a fire alarm sort of thing in my house in the winter, and it was like, get out of the house immediately, get out of the house immediately. So I did, and I called 911, and I was told that the fire marshal could be there in an hour and a half, but to stay outside. And that's because she's in Alpine. It's happening now, yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, the chief of police told me that, and maybe Smokey can elaborate, I think all but one deputy is is there only one deputy living in
Sheriff's Department.
Sheriff's Department? One is left in the valley living in Blair Place.
For now.
No.
Yes, Jean.
So, Raul, how do we see your film, the rest of your film? And Anne, or Mary, how do we see, Anne and Mary, how do we see the rest of Living in Jackson Hole? I think getting those, is there more to this film? The
Yes.
stories of Living in Jackson Hole, and I know we saw only 6 minutes of yours.
Yeah,
Go
yes,
ahead.
we're
Go ahead,
working
Sid.
constantly, shooting. If you'll go to our site, you'll see some examples of some of the things we've done. We also have an article that this story is up now, the Cedar Creek story, and Jason Suter is working on one about the Whole Food Rescue. We'll get a lot more information. We can have a lot more than we have now with greater and greater participation. We don't have money to pay our artists, but we've applied for a grant. We're working on it. We very much intend to do that because artists always end up having to give for free, but this is a different point of view. It's like joint and let's have a voice.
And Raul, how do we see yours?
I'm editing my film. I'm currently editing the film, which is difficult because there is no funding and I'm not asking for funding. I funded the whole thing on my own, so it's on my free time. I've dedicated pretty much my entire free time for the last year and a half to the film. When I'm in town, I'm shooting, and when I'm in Miami working on projects with my major clients in Miami, when I'm in Miami, I come home at night and I edit. It's a lot of work. I'm a one-man show, and I'm hoping for January, February to have it finished, and it'll go up, and maybe I can get something in the paper announcing it. Well, we have something maybe coming up that we
Yeah,
can
we
show
can.
it.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Yeah.
January, we're doing this again.
Yes.
Jackson's like an economy that's based a lot on tourism, and what are the kind of successes or the story or the impression that we should give to the people that support our economy about the issues that we clearly need to tell the story about that are going on with our local community?
I think that's part of what the fear is. There's two sides to that. We don't want to appear to be less than perfect because we do depend on our tourists to come and want to be here. By the same token, if we can't provide good service, we will start losing our tourist economy as well. I mean, there were stories this summer for the first time of people who were really unhappy with service in restaurants, the traffic, all of these things. It was the first time we've heard from my memory, and I've been here 9 years, of people who were really dissatisfied with their experience here. And so we will eventually sort of destroy that which that's the golden cow, the golden cow. So, but that is part of the resistance to being honest about what's going on. There may be some opportunity in that because businesses realize that we're at risk and I think are concerned. And so if we can rally the business community as well as the social services community that's sort of been holding this torch for so long, if we can rally the business community to be a part of that and be a part of the voice, we can perhaps make some inroads.
So the whole point of the talk is art is activism. If you go to urban areas, you see these messages plastered across walls and alleyways every turn you make. In Jackson, I imagine some people would be upset if Banksy came and plastered a political message in back alleys. But forgive me for saying this, y'all seem to be catering towards a niche where you have to hear about it and you have to have access to it. And I do know people with the newspaper who'd be happy to tell your story. But No, we But how do you bring the art as activism into the mainstream of Jackson, where everything that is publicly funded is a reflection of the community character, like the new trees at the Fireway, whereas it has less of a political or activist message than what y'all are trying to achieve.
Are you looking at me? You know, I think it's input like yours that guides us in a different way, in a better way. We're evolving, and we're totally open to hearing. Look, in order to make this happen, this is what you got to do. We want you to tell us.
Well, we want more than that. We want you to tell us and then help us do it.
Do it. Absolutely.
This is a pretty nascent project. And so we are gathering content, and how we disperse that out into the community is really an important piece of it. I think that's right. So that's why we need support and help and eager people to help us do. So.
Something has been suggested is that we do some guerrilla marketing. Therefore, we have these stickers, and you will not leave without getting some. and I just ordered 1,000. So we can do that. We're in the road.
You say it's a moral issue more than a financial issue. But then you point to the fact that it's based on people who own multiple homes that have spare rooms to rent. That's a financial issue. When it comes down to businesses paying people more money, the resort, Jackson Point Mountain Resort, is arguably in the winter the biggest draw to this town. $9 an hour. That's a financial issue. It's not a moral issue, it's financial. People want these bottom lines. So what incentivizes homeowners, secondary homeowners, to rent their places for less than $1,000? What incentivizes businesses to pay people more? When in reality, some of them don't even live here. They won't read the newspaper, they won't listen to these issues. How?
That to me is why it's a moral issue. So yeah, there's a financial, but at what point are people willing to make a little less money? The tourist industry is building itself on the backs of, like I said, very low-wage workers. The owner at Blair Place, to his credit, said, when we talked about the rent, he said to me, why should I subsidize businesses who aren't paying their employees enough? We're all willing to point the finger at somebody else. At the end of the day, if you care about this community, you have to be willing to make some sacrifices. All of us. And so that is why it's more, there's finances involved, but it's not about the money, it's about the moral decision to make a difference. How do you impact people who don't live here? That's a tougher question. I think there is there's pressure that can be brought to bear on the community to do the right thing. People are making a lot of money in this community, and people have a lot of money in this community. There's plenty of money. But there's a lot of people who are suffering terribly. So, and going from $12 to $15 an hour isn't going to help you get into an apartment. It's a trade-off, but that's why for me it's a moral decision that we make as members of the community.
Absolutely, I completely agree. Yeah, it's financial until you realize my landlord, she had to raise our rent this year, and she raised it $75. She could have raised it $1,500, and it would have been not fair, but it wouldn't have been shocking. And she contacted us and she said, I'm raising the rent, but what she did was she stepped back and she looked at the big picture. We take care of her place, we're good people, we repair things for her, we pay it every month on time. And so she said, I don't want other people in there paying more and me having to chase them down to try to get paid. Therefore, I want you guys there, you guys take care. That's the right thing to do. So you have to put a little bit of caring about human beings over profit. And it hurts.
So how does that happen? How do we as a community influence people to care about me who lives?
I think it is public pressure, right? I think that's part of it. We have an interesting situation in which we have a shortage of employees, and yet wages aren't going up. Real wages haven't gone up really since 2007, from my estimations. So why is that? It's because no one's insisting otherwise. So that we have more power together than any of it. You on your own aren't going to have much success with that. But if we as a group come together and say, this is what matters, and this is what's important to us, that can make a difference. Whatever that is, whether it's a political decision around a tax or how we structure the housing authority. I mean, there's so many different political, or if it's a question around how we, who we do business with and how we spend our money and where we're willing to, the businesses that we're willing to participate with because of how they're treating their people. There's some power in that. Cheryl?
Well, I think one of the things that we all have to take the responsibility for is staying active and keeping yourself informed and going to the public meetings, going to the county commission meetings and going to the town council meetings, voicing your concerns, making sure the pressure is on. Because if we don't keep our voices out there and our concerns front and center, the people who are on the commission who would make an effort don't feel they have the support. So we need to give them that support. I think it's very important for us to get very active. If we aren't active, nobody's going to know we're here.
I so agree, and I think it's just we have no voice. To me,
Right.
we have no voice.
Right.
And so, how do we get it? Let's talk about it. Let's make it happen.
Absolutely, all the time.
Way in the back now.
So it's asking this question is I admit that I'm an ostrich, and
Okay.
shame on me. What's the position of the Chamber of Commerce these days on this issue? Once in my life I was involved in that area, and people didn't want a light to shine on this. What's the perspective these days?
My sense, and I'm not going to speak for the chamber, but from what I've heard, their number one concern right now, and the number one concern in the business community is the housing crisis, because they're having a hard time finding employees. Yeah, they don't want to shine a light on it from a perspective of our tourism economy, but they're very concerned because they're having a hard time filling jobs. So it's very practical.
How does the concern translate into activism? Is there any?
For them, I'm not comfortable speaking on behalf of the chamber, but they show up at meetings, they're present, they're engaged in a way that I don't know that they have been in the past, but I won't speak on their behalf. I'll probably get sorry. Yes.
So just first, amazing what you guys are doing, and just so acknowledge the work. Your art is, I come from New England, and Nantucket and Lake Winnipesaukee and Stratton and Martha's Vineyard are very, very similar. And, they're blue states, not red states. So I think it is a moral issue that together we can push politically, because there's a lot of things those states do that I've talked to county commission. We can't do that in Wyoming. We can't do that here. Well, let's get creative. So one thought with your art. I want to make sure you know that you didn't say that to me. I did not. It was before. So you would already be surprised. But one thought with the art is to say in the activism, if there's a way to go to some of those places, even with art, to say there are other solutions. So it's not just us banging on our chests, but other places have found ways.
Yeah, thank you.
Not perfect, but my taxes in Stratton were 3 times as much for exactly the same place as somebody who lived there full time. And that, all the people from Boston said that's okay, because that's our tax going in. And it makes me crazy here that we don't have any.
And I just posted something on our Facebook site in San Francisco about a community involvement in affordable housing. And this whole community has gotten together, they've worked out a plan, and they're making it happen. So again, that's community voice. So there are a couple of things from San Francisco that.
So maybe in to be aware of the section of there are other solutions in other places that could bring us.
Great idea.
Yeah.
There's also, I had an interesting experience this year in Smoky. You were with me when we went to the housing conference in Casper, I think it was. It was the first time, it's the first one I'd been to, but Smoky had said previously, everyone sort of poo-pooed the idea that Jackson had a housing problem. And a number of people had seen Raul's short of his documentary, and it completely shifted the way people perceived us, our community, and the problems that we were facing. So even within our own state, it was amazing to me the impact that that had. So it does, it works. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
I was just going to say, as far as stories are concerned, Raul, your story about a positive landlord and what they're doing positively is really important, and to stress that as well as the sad stories.
Great point.
Because I think as far as Marriott, there was a lot done by that previous owner to try to mitigate some of those issues. So, I think a lot of the people would kind of be competitive in a way to be the good guy, instead of always just focusing on the bad.
And I agree, and I think that sometimes that pressure that we need to bring to bear is positive pressure. So we're going to hold up the employers that pay a living wage. We're going to hold up the landlords that don't raise the rent $1,500 when they could. I think that's a really important piece of that. So
We're definitely working on that, and I'm really looking for a benevolent landlord, so she may have this period. I think yes, a whole article about that.
I don't really have a question. I just want to say I know that construction projects take a lot longer than expected, and that even if we were able to have a magic wand and have something change overnight, that even if we start building tomorrow, that these things would take 2 to 3 years. So there are things that I think we can start to pressure people about. And I think a lot of that starts, and this isn't a question, this is just a statement from me as someone that lives here, but I think a living wage would be something that would help bridge that gap, because we're not going to have a solution for this tomorrow. It's much more complex than one thing. But if everyone could kind of get behind what you were talking about, $9 an hour, I mean, after taxes, that's criminal. I mean, I would ask anyone that is some type of business owner for an experiment to pay themselves $9 an hour for 40 hours 1 week, and then try to support yourself, or try to support you and your dog, or heaven forbid, you and a family. And I think if we can start that conversation, I think that there can be some type of dialogue that can bring a solution about, because this isn't something that we're going to fix overnight, but I think that a living wage that everyone can agree on is something that is a solution that we can all decide to take action on January 1. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of time. So if you work for someone that pays $9 an hour, let them know how you feel. And I think that's the best place to start. Yeah, make sure you pay 3 months in advance.
I have another idea along with that. I think we should consider temporary rent control. I really do. I've been in communities where they've had it, and we are not going to get the long-term solution. You're absolutely right immediately, and until we get something closely approximating it, I think we should consider rent control. I know it's going to be flying in the face of a lot of people's anger.
Okay, I want to say thank you. I have a couple of announcements. We're going to have the Art and Activism at the Center for the Arts on January 20th, so mark your calendar and save the date. It'll be different topics. And I want to say thank you to my board member, Sandy Hessler, for saving me today and letting me use her projector. And thank you all very much for coming. Make sure that you put your name and your email address out there if you want to continue receiving information about ThinkWy gatherings. Thank you.